Hanging with Higgins, where author and former prosecutor John J. Higgins interviews his intriguing guests about their lives, knowledge, experiences, and projects. Explore, learn, and be entertained. Come, join us now.
Good evening, and welcome to Hanging with Higgins. I'm your host, John J. Higgins. Tonight, I have a very interesting woman as my guest, Jennifer Schwartz Flack. She graduated with a master's degree from the California University of Pennsylvania, is a certified guidance counselor for grades kindergarten through 12th grade, and has extensive experience working with both adolescents and adults in the areas of drug and alcohol counseling, grief, and loss. She has also worked with juvenile offenders in 2 counties in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Additionally, she's a spiritual counselor and is also the founder of the Healing Fields Wellness Center. Lastly, she's also an adjunct professor. She has sites on Facebook and Twitter, and her main website is www.serenityjenny.com. That's SerenityJenny.com. Now I'd like to welcome you, Jenny. How are you today?
I'm doing fabulous. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's greatly my pleasure. Now, I was looking over your extensive background. You seem to have a level of expertise in the disciplines of education, psychology, and the spiritual field. People could say that the fields are quite different in approaches, but I can see how there would be a great area of overlap. So could you tell us how you pursued each one of these fields?
Interestingly enough, I quit high school 5 months before graduation. I went to work on the ambulance and in the EMS field. While working in that field, I just kept seeing a need for critical incident stress debriefing, different things along with counseling, and I wanted to help. I'm an inherent helper. I couldn't help myself from that field if I tried. So I pursued the counseling. And when I applied for the counseling program and got my bachelor's in psychology and went on to graduate school, the professor that was my advisor said to be a school counselor because there's a great need for school counselors in this area. And if I was a community major, I could actually go either way, into the schools or into the community.
Okay.
So it seemed like a good idea at the time. And I thought, wow, I could just transition back to the ambulance service I wanted to or get my school certification. But when I did the internship in the drug and alcohol field, I fell in love. I fell in love with helping the patients. I felt at home there. And I actually applied what I learned there and took it into the schools, and I developed the school-based outpatient drug and alcohol counseling in Westmoreland County in Pennsylvania. So it was a very, very easy transition with that. And with that, I started seeing a need for spiritual-based counseling within the field of drug and alcohol. So it kind of just lends itself to the progression of my career, I guess.
Uh-huh. Well, it certainly makes a lot of sense. I mean, they are basically connected. I have a friend who ended up with a PsyD from Rutgers, and I think he got his PsyD actually in schools or some kind of certification in school, so he could go either way as well. So whoever your advisor was advised you well.
Yes, he did. That would be Dr. Samid. Thank you, Dr. Samid.
Right. And then, the whole, drug and alcohol field is I mean, the main treatment, right, for it is all a spiritual-based program, which is the 12 steps anyway.
Absolutely.
So that kind of, fits with, that development that you went through.
Mm-hmm.
So, were there any significant cases you worked on or whatever that would lead you one to the other, or was it just a progression in general?
The progression into spiritual-based practice from educational and psychological actually started to unfold while I worked in the rehab. I started to see both adolescents and adults, and every time somebody would come into the door, I was looking at a broken soul more so than a human with a drug and alcohol condition or affliction, if you will. So once I started recognizing a part of God, if you will, and all these people and that's a God of your own understanding, however you choose that to be. I started seeing that maybe in 1935, Dr. Bob and Bill W. had it right. Maybe this is a spiritual malady. And maybe we should just start looking at this and start looking at energy psychology and pursuing non-traditional or alternative therapies to assist people in getting better faster. And it started to work. And the more I researched and the more I applied these things into my practice for counseling, the better my caseload became. And to the point where, at one time I probably had 16 of these boys wanting to stay an hour after the court-mandated drug and alcohol treatment session, which was unheard of. So something was working.
Right. Well, adolescents, I guess, in general, are the hardest population to work with, right?
Right, absolutely. And the retention rate is very low for adolescents, due to attrition, due to different things. But, these children were interested in energy and spirit and what that could do for them and what they were disconnected from. And they didn't realize that. I'm not sure what part of their soul needed nourished, but it was getting it at a drug and alcohol treatment facility, which was kind of unheard of to their parents too, who also come in to the facility to see what was going on because they wanted to know what was working.
Right. And with those kids opening up to you, that's a rarity.
Absolutely. And the retention rate and the sobriety of the children throughout the treatment session or, the treatment stay there, was almost 100% with that group as I started to track it to be able to provide some feedback to my management staff. And, they weren't real excited though when I started to provide them with information that I was practicing quote unquote outside the scope of practice at the time. So my programming budgeting wasn't really supported, but that's okay. We just went a different route with it. Right.
Well, I was involved in the state of New Jersey when we changed the whole substance abuse system for adolescents pretty much. Well, I guess for all adults as well, because I guess drug school zones would be geared towards kids, but the Governor's Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse was the entire system itself, from, prevention to education to treatment, dealing with the insurance companies, all of that. At least in the beginning we did. I remember going through all the protocols of what was going to be the requirements for someone to be a student assistance counselor in the high school. And that was an extensive, like a 9-month time period before we even posted the regs and started going through the administrative law process. I'm kind of surprised, though, even thinking back, that there really was no discussion on the spiritual end, probably because more separation of government from churches. But it does seem to me that it's just an important piece in all of it. And adolescence, probably there's 2 time periods in your lifetime, 3 time periods in your lifetime that you most seek spiritual kind of guidance. And that's probably adolescence, because that's insanity, going through the hormonal stages, when people later become in some kind of crisis or towards the end of your life. So if you can get them on the right track when they're young, of course that would, be a better thing. And by right track, I mean, some means of process to deal with their emotional pain and concerns.
And children relate really well to music, to nature, to things that, typically we wouldn't refer to as quote unquote God, or we would refer to them in the rooms as good orderly direction. So whatever your higher power is to you, the approach with kids is that, music can be a higher power. And there's a lot of things energetically, spiritually that we were working with, and the approach was very successful because they got it. And spirituality, as opposed to religion, would be the separation between the two. Spirituality is just a connection, and the kids got it. Each religion was a set of rules that connect to spirit. And, we basically helped them develop their own connection through whatever means necessary. And they got it. And it worked.
Right.
And it was phenomenal.
Well, I also know, having, of course, been involved in the drug-free school zone, approach to things where we basically increased the penalties and, created these zones where, there were almost draconian consequences for dealing drugs in schools and in the neighborhoods. I mean, at that point, we were really trying to get the drugs out of the schools. So
Right.
that was the approach we had in the 80s. Now, obviously, as time's gone on, legislators love to pass laws of, being law and order type guys, gals, whatever. And so they keep increasing the penalties. So now we're ending up with this large population of nonviolent people sitting in prisons, which, I don't think was ever the intent over the long term.
Right.
But, now we talk about legalization, at least in the terms of marijuana, and I don't think anything else is really being discussed, thank God, in that regard. But my big concern has always been in that approach that the black market for drugs is generally for younger people to begin with. Because, back in my day, it would be easier when the drinking age was 21 for somebody in high school to get their hands on an illicit substance than alcohol in many cases. And so that black market, even if you legalize marijuana or whatever, it will not be removed. It will still flourish. Maybe even flourish more because the adults can get at access much easier. And then, of course, when you're putting those kinds of substances in the developing mind, because, right, the brain doesn't fully develop until you're out 21 or 25, you can cause problems in cognitive reasoning and problem solving in other areas by that exposure. So I think, the approach of trying to get kids clean or give them a healthier approach to life so they don't even go down the drug path or the alcohol abuse path to begin with is always the best investment.
Absolutely. And treating a hole in the soul is much easier at the root cause than it is trying to treat the symptoms. And the drug and alcohol use seems to, at least in my opinion, even though it's a disease in and of itself, it's showing us that there's a very deep-rooted system at work here, and we need to treat that. And it really seems to work.
Right. Well, I've also always found that, I don't want to say amusing, but interesting, that the term for alcohol was always spirits. And it's being treated with a spiritual program if you think about that. It's like
it's an exorcism of sorts, I guess.
Right. And we all know that, the whole, Dr. Bob and Bill W. approach, in some ways came off of some of the suggestions of Dr. Carl Jung, who had studied under Freud.
Exactly.
So, it's just an interesting kind of entwinement that has occurred in that whole area. Now, I know you also worked with adolescents that were, I guess, juvenile offenders.
Yes.
That's a particularly difficult population. How did you really deal with that? Did you deal with it differently or the same as any adolescent?
Actually, after I had started in the drug and alcohol field, I was asked to work with my success with the adolescents. They asked me to work with juvenile sex offenders, and they typically weren't responding to the therapist that they were sending in, so they gave me the worst caseload that they had. And we did home-based treatment, so it was very interesting. I did home-based treatment. Yes, it was very interesting. With the offender, after they were reintegrated with the family, I was the therapist that would go in and would actually reintegrate. So it was very, very difficult to go into some homes and try to straighten out something that wasn't perceived to be a problem. So spiritually speaking, I had a lot of help.
I would hope so.
I had a lot of protection too, thank goodness, because I really didn't know how I was getting through to a lot of the clients and the families. But it seemed to boil down to the same approach. And I didn't realize it until I stepped back. And after 6 months of this job, it was very consuming, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, even though you can be a seasoned counselor and still, have a draw on your own energy just because it's consuming. And it really is. And people don't understand, spiritually speaking, how much energetic debris they can collect. So
Right.
some of these houses were just, I was exhausted when I would leave. So the more I learned about energy and spiritual practices, I thought, I don't think I should be working in this field too much longer. I don't think I can take it. So, it's just a constant exposure to really spiritually, we'll just say invading. I mean, it rocks your soul sometimes to understand what these children and families have gone through and will continue to go through until its cycle is broken and treated and something changes. And a lot of times, we fight the good fight, we give it the best effort, we bring our best approach, and it still doesn't work. So
Right.
it's high turnover in that field for counselors, and I did the best I could for as long as I could, but I figured out very quickly that was not the field for me.
Well, I was also involved with children's issues at one point. It's very little I wasn't involved with at some point. I sometimes look back and figure, I don't know what the Almighty was trying to do to me, but, the whole problem in the juvenile justice system, the particularly difficult cases were always the juvenile sex offenders and the fire starters. Mm-hmm. And, they really were floundering in terms of finding some kind of treatment approach that, would really help them. And at least from anything I had learned back in those days was that, the majority of the juvenile sex offenders were not spontaneous sex offenders. They had been victims themselves.
Exactly.
And so it always caused, this tension of, what do you do with someone, at the age of 13 or 14 who's, sexually abusing younger? Are you punishing them or are you rehabilitating them? And then, even if you treat the underlying, victimization that occurred with them, is that going to stop them from, repeating and, the same act and offending themselves? And the reason I really bring that up right now when you mentioned that was I was just reading an article today. There was a teacher up in North Jersey that, he's now a sex offender, and he had been a school teacher teaching French. It was one of his students and all those things. But now he's come forward and described that he himself at the age of 15 was being abused by his female French instructor, who she was, abusing him almost in the same scenario. So it was almost like a duplication or a replication of the same acts that had occurred to him. Mm-hmm. Now, certainly that's an excuse an adult in my mind, but I just think that kind of reinforces, how difficult that population is to deal with.
It absolutely is, and it is a vicious cycle. It is difficult to break, and even when a child has been incarcerated or any kind of confinement that has been removed from the family and is going to be reintegrated with another family, it's just a difficult situation all the way around because we need to treat the unit as the family as a unit, and that's very difficult to do. And it's just, I give people a lot of credit who do that on a daily basis. When I send energy and blessings, they're on my list.
Yeah. No. And now they didn't return to their family of origin, right?
No, they would be reintegrated. A lot of them would actually offend after placement or reoffend after placement. So, they're going from home to home to home, doing exactly what you said. It's not like they spontaneously offend. They're just duplicating what has been done to them or what they know to be true. So,
right.
They may think this sense of normalcy is that's how their family operated. The family of origin operated that way. When they come into a new family, this is how you operate. And a lot of them developmentally are stagnated, and the trauma keeps them developmentally at maybe the age they were victimized. So if you have a 10-year-old who's victimizing younger children, developmentally, psychologically, they may be 5. So,
right.
And spiritually speaking, now that I know a lot of things that I know, that trauma psychologically as well freezes the development. So until that trauma is processed and released, that person, you could have an adult that's 40 years old, and they may be abused as a 10-year-old child or a 12-year-old child. That trauma is stuck in that energy psychological system. Until it's released, it's going to continue to create a problem.
Right, and that was one of the interesting things I read in this news article on this teacher. Was fairly thorough in terms of going. It wasn't like an article you would read like in a 3-inch column. It was like a long story in multiple parts, and you could see that as the male teacher had been abused as the 15-year-old, that there was a disassociation that clearly came through in the way he was describing what had happened to him. So, I think that's one of the weaknesses in psychology, even for PTSD victims, is that it's trying to find some way of reconnecting the person with the traumatic event, to process it, because it's so easy to go into a disassociative state for those people.
Well, I know that you have a lot of interest in past life regression, and this kind of may get us ahead in our interview, but this type of disassociation, psychologically, what I had studied and learned in my formal training in graduate school, now, with the spiritual overlay of the information that I have now, there are different techniques and or abilities that you can do spiritually speaking and have a healing occur that took us 6 months in therapy to do, or longer if it even happened at all, that 6 sessions might do, or 60 minutes might do, because the reintegration of the, we'll say, disassociated part of the soul that leaves the body when the trauma is actually occurring can be integrated much easier spiritually, at least in my experience, than it is psychologically. And I know it operates on all those levels, but the spiritual integration or reintegration of the soul and spirit, connect that trauma to the event, allowing the feeling to be felt, removed, or released, and the healing to occur. And psychologically, it may have taken us, like I said, 6 months to get to that point where there's rapport built, there's trust, there's therapeutic buy-in. Now, 1 session, 2 sessions, 6 sessions, this person's experiencing a huge health benefit psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Well, that does make sense. The whole psychotherapeutic model, at least in the area of psychology, right, relies really on one. Freud was really into the emotional attachments that were occurring between the therapist and the client, which is certainly nothing that you could put your finger on or touch, or I don't think you can really measure, as opposed to the experimental and the behaviorists, which, they have, I think the field kind of went in that direction in many ways because it was something they could measure, test, and work with. But if it's this connectivity that kind of goes on between individuals in many ways, why can't it be the connectivity within the person themselves?
Absolutely. And
really, that's what they talk about, integration, right? Integration is reintegrating, the emotional part with the intellectual.
You got it. And a lot of times that the disassociation, when we say that, happens, it's spiritually. We're speaking spiritually now. It's almost like the soul leaves the body, so it can preserve, self-preservation. So while the trauma occurs, and a lot of times you'll have a patient, their account of the situation is they're watching it. And spiritually speaking, I know that can be true now because the soul is out of the body. So when they do have to account for this time and this trauma and try to process it, they can remember it. And now, spiritually speaking, we do Reiki, we do different tapping techniques. There's just it's more of a synergy type of session. I've come to learn that it's just synergistically work if we just incorporate all these things, and people experience a huge benefit in all levels, in all areas. Right.
That's that whole thing. Like I said, it's definitely in the PTSD kind of field, because you hear that of soldiers. They attach themselves on the battlefield for what's going on around them. Mm-hmm. But as I'm sitting here too, I have a real interest in not only the past life regressions, but also near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. And that what you said really with this association really is so similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
With watching, from above or as an observer rather than as a participant. Maybe at some point, all of these things are tied together, and there'll be a technique or an approach and maybe you have some of those that kind of reconnect all of that.
I'm learning through experience and research and practice and application that my formal training as a counselor and a therapist and my now training as a spiritual healer, it just seems to be a synergistic approach that healing is occurring on all dimensions, on all levels at once. And it is very effective. And maybe it will be the birth of a new technique. Who knows?
Well, right. 130 years ago, there were mesmerizers, right?
Right, exactly.
It was Freud, I guess, really started that way, and then he I don't know if he stumbled upon it, but he certainly made it more famous and studied it, more so, was the whole idea of the unconscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
Put a label on it, and then studied what those effects were, rather than just trying to hypnotize people.
Right.
So,
and now we have the conscious, the unconscious, and if we go one step further, we have the spirit mind. So things are, from then until now, the birth of psychology was 1879, and here we are in 2014, and things are just going to catapult us into a different dimension.
Yeah. So, extremely interesting stuff. I was, at one point I was going to go to clinical psych until my one boss talked me into law school, which I don't know if that was a wise move or not, but it was a different move. And,
I'd say it worked out pretty good for you.
Yeah. And so I know that there were some rumblings in some of the doctoral programs about, some of the more holistic viewpoints in dealing with
Mm-hmm.
a person. And I thought that was kind of fascinating, but they were kind of in I don't know. They certainly weren't in the Harvard and Yale or Rutgers or whatever kind of PsyD programs. They were kind of more in the flu kind of things back in the day. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad to see that there's been a lot of development in that, because it makes a lot more sense.
It's alive and well, and we're on the edge.
Yeah. So why don't you go a little bit more into this past life regression and past life therapy kind of thing? Because like I said, that has really always fascinated me.
I'd love to tell you there's an awesome protocol that we follow to do these things, but as I have studied Reiki, and Reiki to me is like God-directed energy medicine, and becoming attuned to Reiki, to the energy, to the healing, it's opened up a lot of intuitive gifts for me. Mediumship being one of them, being psychic another, and just using all our clear senses as we practice this. I really would like to tell you there's a great tapping protocol that I use, but there's a non-protocol that I use. Okay. So I intuitively am guided to instruct where the tapping is. The EFT, emotional freedom technique, is tapping technique. And I utilize that, and I am guided to direct the patient to actually tap in certain areas to release energy that's trapped in the meridians, to get back to those past lives that maybe, and it's like a free association as well. It's psychotherapeutic. I'm blending again. I guess it's my own synergistic non-protocol that I'm using. But okay. Through this process that I was guided, I don't know if it was channeled or how exactly I got it. It just kind of came together. I just took things that I knew to have worked in the past, started incorporating new things that I was learning and picking up on and going to training for and getting certified in, and blending this all together. And once a patient was able to tap through and free associate, and I was doing some muscle testing as well to get through to this issue that they had been having. Behaviorally speaking, it was patterned. I mean, they brought it into this life. So we'd be able to go back, and they would free associate. They would be able to talk to me about whatever they were seeing, experiencing, feeling, and we would be able to isolate past life issues and or traumas that they were actually acting out in this lifetime. So once you clear the trauma from the energy meridian, it just seems to free the person in this lifetime, and they're able to process the trauma, release it, and move on in a forward motion.
Wow. Well, I learned about all that stuff with the, Dr. Brian Weiss kind of thing, and, I had met him, and, he does the hypnotherapeutic kind of viewpoint. And you had mentioned this EFT tapping. Like I said to you before we went on the air, I bought the book that Wayne Dyer was pushing, I guess, in the spring, but I never even cracked it because I've been sidetracked with other things in life. But it sounded like an interesting thing. Could you explain to us exactly what it is and how that works?
Well, I can explain to you best of my knowledge. Again, I was guided to use it. So
okay.
When I was introduced to it, I believe it's the Nick Warner book that Wayne Dyer actually endorsed it. And he's phenomenal. You can find his work throughout the internet and Google him. He's fantastic. I actually developed it. Emotional freedom technique, tapping the energy meridians in certain points on the body, to release trapped or stagnant energy, to reset or recalibrate the energy system. So it actually stimulates an energetic release. So whereas Reiki, we would be, a healing body with our hands, we're channeling energy that way. This technique actually allows the patient themselves, the client themselves, to tap certain areas of their body. Nobody else has to be involved. You can do this yourself. You can follow a video at home. It's very interesting. It makes you feel great. It just gives you, it kind of has the same effect as yoga, at least in my opinion. I just feel really good. I feel energized. I feel like things are flowing better. People akin it to chakra meditation, and they actually release, build up energy in those areas. So they describe it as just having a renewed sense of self or purpose too. A lot of times, it feels really good.
Well, that certainly would make sense if you believe the Hindu-Indian approach, right, with the chakras and all of that is like centers in your body that store or are more receptive to certain things.
Yes.
So this is really utilizing that, right, in another way.
Yes, it is. It's definitely enabling a person to even do that themselves.
So when you're dealing with somebody, do they go into like a hypnotic trance? How does that get communicated? Does it come through them just in conscious mind or in an unconscious track?
It actually, it's like trance state, I would say. You're relaxed, a lot of relaxation breathing and the beginning of it, just like you would before a guided meditation. So when I'm guiding them to tap on certain areas of their body, it is a trance-like induced state that you would be very relaxed in. A lot of people do adhere to hypnosis, and there is no hypnosis involved, but you just get really deep into the energy and feeling your spirit, basically.
Okay. And then when they're reporting to you, I assume they tell you what their past life was. How do you know what, when you're progressing in that with the patient?
Well, intuitively, I'm guided to have them tap on, certain areas to release. If it's anger issue, they're going to be tapping a certain meridian. If it's grief issue, a certain meridian. So I'm guided to have them tap in that area. When they tap in that area, I'm asking them to describe what they're seeing, what they're feeling, whatever basically comes up for them. And that's very, free association. I've taken some psychotherapeutic stuff from Freud and incorporating into this. And when it's coming up, I'm asking them to describe it, much like a pathway progression where, we're describing the climate, where they're at, what they look like. And it's just very interesting how quickly it goes. It's very quick, and you're able to progress through lives very fast. And the trauma that has been experienced is just, as soon as it's acknowledged, it feels like it's released, and they're able to progress on to a different thing.
Wow. I had interviewed a woman not long ago who I guess used hypnotherapy as the approach, and she had an amusing story in that there was a guy that she was friends with who kept telling her basically that would never work, and that he seemed to poo-poo the whole idea, but every time she spoke to him, he was asking her about it. So eventually he said he said, "I give up. Okay, let's do it." And And then he seemed to have, like, he just kept spilling one story after another once he was hypnotized, which,
Mhm.
it's amusing in some ways, but in another, it's like his psyche or spirit, it was like they had found the doorway and kept pushing him in that direction unconsciously and then got him there.
It's amazing how many things happen to us, like synchronistically, that get us to the place that we really need to be. And maybe she was guided and directed to keep pushing the envelope with him, and he would eventually crack and just say, okay. But it's amazing the messages we get.
So did you have any particularly interesting past life experiences that these people described to you? I mean, everybody, I think if you ask them who've never been through this kind of thing they would all think that they were the famous person from history, which we know
Well,
they can't. I don't
all
think
can't be the famous person, no.
they.
But I do have an interesting story about a young man. I can't give you too many details, but he had done this technique with me, and at the end of the technique, after he had a lot of release, he had a gunshot wound, and we had progressed him through that lifetime, and he talked about the gunshot wound, and I mean, he talked to the people around, the feelings, and I'm channeling energy, and at that time, I didn't even know exactly what was going on with me. I'm crying, and I'm trying not to disturb him at all, but I have big tears coming down my face, and the energy in the whole room changed. And I thought, wow, this is phenomenal. What is this?
Right.
And I think I was channeling spirit, to be honest with you, in a medium state. Didn't know that at the time. Just thought I was being a regular therapist, regular spiritual counselor. And he was done, and I can't tell you what famous person it was. However, this young man had a deep, deep affinity for John Lennon. He even looked like him a little bit. Not that
Wow.
was him or anything. But when we were done, I intuitively asked him. I said, I usually don't ask anybody this ever, and I prayed that he didn't think it was inappropriate, but I said, I think you have a gunshot wound on your chest. He said, I cannot believe you even just said that. This young boy had a mark in the exact same place.
Wow.
That is probably by far one of the coolest things that has ever happened. And this kid is going on to really awesome things. I mean, I'm really excited for him. And he embraced spirit, and he embraced the healing that he received. And that was only a couple sessions, maybe 2 sessions we did. And getting him to that place, and he was freed up of a lot of burdens. He had a lot of discomfort, anxiety. Just there were situations that he was in that the past life drama actually caused him to be fearful of. So he would stay away from public places, and it presented like anxiety. And
Right.
I know when somebody's coming to see me, they're not looking for a normal counselor, because I am not that.
Right.
There's counselors that have shingles up and down the road here, but if you're coming to me, there's probably a spiritual area that you need some help in.
Well, some of because we see more of the people in history because of the records that are always left. But, John Lennon particularly, he was nervous about being attacked by somebody. That was one of his concerns. It was almost like, a precognition kind of thing. And then, you study history, right? The big story about Julius Caesar with his wife Cassandra, I think it was, predicting, beware the Ides of March, and sure as hell he was murdered on the 15th of March, and Lincoln seeing himself laid out in the casket, in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so if all of these things are really in I've always thought this, that, if you remove the controlling thing in our dimension really is time. If you remove time and everything coexists, you would have all that knowledge all at once, right? It doesn't take time to develop.
Exactly. Well, as a medium, and the more I study and the more I develop my abilities, it's like having a 24-hour, 7 days a week library to pull from, and it's absolutely amazing. So we really have a wealth of knowledge in this collective consciousness, if you will.
Right. And then just in terms of like world events and that, I always thought, by the time I got to this point in my lifetime, that we would have solved all these screwy problems that were going on in the world. And I think they've gotten worse rather than better. And our knowledge really has not had much of an effect. But if anything, it's made them worse, I think. And so there must be some other thing being played out, that it's not a lack of knowledge that causes problems in the world. It's been, it's, as one of my friends says, that it's like God's version of TV,
Right.
He's creating different, programs and then watching how it goes. Actually, I think allowing us to, do whatever we need to do.
I think it's a call to back to spirit, not exactly religion. I mean, anybody can connect in any way, but the call back to spirit, it seems to go out. There was a lot of speculation about 12, 12, 12, 12, 21, 12, but I definitely think there was a call put out on some level, because the 2013 was just a shake-up year. It feels like 2014 is a fallout year, and things are falling into place. And I feel like also that, the amount of awakened or conscious people, if you will, would be like the light under a door in a dark room. And that door is about to open. So it's a really exciting time. And I think Tesla had it right. We should have been studying phenomena a long time ago.
No, that man was certainly a genius well beyond his time,
Absolutely.
But I think unfortunately in our world, we really are more afraid of those kind of geniuses. So that's why they end up getting sidetracked or destroyed in the process.
You got that right. That's for sure. I definitely colored outside the lines when I was in school and scored higher on most tests and didn't really march to the beat of the drummer. My goodness, I don't even think there was music playing when I was marking, but I honestly feel like those of us who felt different or out of place were truly given a gift and an ability, and now it's time to help empower and enlighten people to that and their inherent power.
Well, in a maybe unrelated, but I think related topic, there was somebody else. I was on her radio show actually, and we were talking about the polarization of politics in the country, and the interview first started where it was pretty pessimistic, but and then it, there's something that always changes in me. I can't stay pessimistic for very long. It's like I can't talk about something super serious without cracking a joke, but it was like, as I was talking, it really dawned on me that, we're Americans. We don't give up. We don't hide. We take it on. And that's like ingrained in us, that rebelliousness. And, in talking further, it was like, how are we going to change this? And I really believe a lot of the hope comes from like the internet and the interconnectivity we have with one another.
Absolutely.
Where the voices can hear one another now, whereas in the past, they would be kind of lost or, put almost in a circus sideshow, as opposed to, the people who have special gifts being able to connect with one another and maybe provide guidance and move things forward, rather than being isolated. And I feel like you just, I think that there is going to be a change, and hopefully it won't be, it will move smoothly without, the French Revolution approach, but, I don't think things can stay on the path they're on. And I do, I have hope that, we will find some other alternative way of getting, the the corruption and the greed and the negative, a lot of the negative leadership we have in the country, to step aside, if that's, that's not what a leader's job is, so now
Well,
I know you're,
go
go ahead.
I just
No,
think
go ahead.
that the revolution that you're speaking of is we are in it, and it's happening, and the shift. It's a shift. It's a spiritual shift in the entire world, and it's coming to fruition through the internet and through all that connectedness. But I also feel like the eternal optimist, that would be what I would say we are. We could bring a drop of sunshine out of anything, but we are starting to attract one another. So it's almost like magnets, and the more that we just are attracting, and the more collective energy we have, the bigger influence, the bigger pull we have. So I really do think that I talked to a lady this morning that was from Phoenix. She's an awesome artist. Her name is Vic Reach, does chakra mandalas. I would have never even discovered this woman had it not been for Facebook. So there's energy in her art, and it was just amazing how that attracted me to her, and we're on the same vibration. She's like-minded, and I thought, wow, 5 minutes later I'm talking to somebody from Phoenix. 15 minutes later I had a phone conversation with somebody from South Africa. So it's just amazing how quickly it works, and how wonderful law of attraction is, spirituality is, and how big of a change we're going to see. It's actually exciting. There's the angel of hope. I'd come to a lady that did readings for me before, and she had shared that with myself and a couple other practitioners. And she said, this is the time for change. And the angel of hope appeared to her before she had passed away. And she said, this is our year. And I believe that. I can feel that and know that to be a truth.
Well, I think that's good news for many of us who've been struggling through 2013.
Yeah, that was the shake-up year for sure. This is the fallout year. We're almost through it, guys. You just got to get to the new year, and we got this.
Right. Well, the other thing I was going to say is that, I had predicted that the Soviet Union could not stay the way it was. This was even almost when I was a kid, because you can't have creative people living in under a dictatorship. This whole nonsense that the Chinese and the Russians are communists. Communism is an economic system. It's not the political system that runs what goes on. And you have people who are creative and thinking outside of the box, because that's what creativity means. You can't be having them answer to people who are trying to restrict them without eventually some major change coming. And so I think that's one piece that's going to happen. And the other is that, it's kind of hard to have an enemy that you communicate with, people to people. It's usually the political leaders that get us into this thing where it's, the dogma or whatever, catechism or religious teaching or whatever that they want their people to die for. When I loved Kennedy's speech where he basically said, we're all mortal. We're all concerned about our children. We all breathe the same air. We're all, inhabitants of this planet. And, the problems here are man-made and they can be solved. And, it's not this stuff that we've got to go conquer somebody or, kill them all, whatever, so.
It's so right, too. And going back to Lennon there, I often hear his song and those words ring in my head very frequently. I am a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. We can all live together. We can all rise above this. If we do work together, we empower each other, we help each other, we will overcome. Right.
And, the 12-step programs really embrace that whole approach. The most important person who comes into that room is the weakest among them.
Absolutely.
Not the person, with 70 bazillion years of sobriety. It's the guy who's coming in for the first day,
Yeah.
Which is, and I think that's really what the religions were originally based on. They've just gotten convoluted somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So
misinterpreted.
Yeah. So now I know you're working on this project of yours, this Healing Fields Wellness Center. Maybe you could go into that for us.
Well, I initially envisioned it as a soul, I guess, hospital. I don't really like that word. I'm trying to get away from it, like a soul center, a retreat, a recharge, someplace where you can get your spirit and your soul nourished and re-energized. I want to do a lot of enlightenment work there, empowerment, energy, healing of every kind, so physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. And through that process, through nature, through music, I have a large farm in Scottsdale where it's going to be constructed at. The facility now is just, it's living in my mind. I have a different office at the current time, but we're going to transition that to the farm here, and there's just a lot of healing that can be done in nature. My mom is Native American. My dad was what you would call somebody that laid hands out of the Bible. I thought everybody did healings on Sunday afternoons. I guess that wasn't the case when I went to school and started speaking about it. Nobody really did that after dinner on Sunday. So I kind of talked about it after I realized that. But I grew up on a farm. We lived off the land, and I was taught a lot of core values or core healing techniques and approaches as a child, and I didn't realize how disconnected society had become until I started working in different areas. And just, I guess, God kind of gave me some on-the-job training in a lot of different areas. It almost looks like a 20-year identity crisis to most. But I'm able to bring that all together, and it gave me a well-rounded approach to this healing where I see this spot, this land, nature, and everything just coming together to heal a person's soul. And truly speaking, that's our essence. We're spiritual beings. We're having this wonderful human experience, but at some level, we get broken, and we need help along the way to get our pieces put back together. And I've been through that experience myself. I'm still healing. We all probably will continue to heal throughout our time here, but I know it's been effective for me, and I want to help other people obtain that. And it's not, a lot of, don't get me started on healthcare, but sometimes it prevents us from getting well. And I want all people to have access to that.
Right. But now this is in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania, right? Not Scottsdale, Arizona.
Nope. Scottsdale, no S. Close to Scottsdale, but it's only Scottsdale. And it's in Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, about 40 miles from Pittsburgh.
Okay. Well, as a kid, I worked on some farms and whatever, so it had taught me some really valuable lessons that I think that, particularly, young people and teenagers certainly don't have at all today. And I think that's, if there's one thing that I think that has really raised the level of violence, kid to kid kind of thing, and, the shootings and all the other things is that there's really no conception of death. And when you live and work on a farm, death is almost a monthly, if not a daily kind of thing that you deal with. Livestock gets killed, or it dies, or you have a predator that's running around, and you really understand that, the animal, once it dies, does not come back. It's not like resetting a computer game. And
that's exactly right, too. There's no fantasy. It's all reality when you live on a farm. We had beef cattle. We raised beef cattle for slaughter, and we raised our own pork, and everything was utilitarian on the farm. So there was no getting too close to any pets or naming them. And, that was a good process. And there was lots of friends of mine that would always stay over and come and want to experience this process. And their parents loved that they could experience this. We lived 5 minutes from town, but, we were close enough so we could have people over. And it was a really awesome experience. And I have a lot of friends that have a lot of great memories from growing up with me on the farm that they were able to access through, our friendship, and that helped them. We built hay, we did everything. We did things, we wanted to pick beans at our house because my dad planted, my mom too, rows of beans that were like a mile long. Nobody ever wanted to come and do that, but there's some other learning lessons, and and life experiences that they really appreciated.
I probably could have held myself out at the age of 12 as a professional strawberry picker. So Lord knows how many of those little quart things of strawberries I picked in my lifetime.
I thought 5 cents a basket was a good price, but with inflation nowadays, I don't think I'd be willing to do that.
Well, I had one farmer where you can tell how good my negotiating skills were at the time was that he said, well, I can pay either 25 cents an hour or 25 cents a day. And I felt sorry for the farmer, so I took the quarter a day.
No.
And, and to be honest with you, at one point he couldn't even pay me that. And, I figured that was just a good deed I did as a kid. And, actually I did make enough I could take flying lessons, so I don't know. I must have been working a lot of days. And, but that's the other thing with farming that really burns something into your head is that there is no vacation.
No.
It is day in and day out,
We had a hunting and fishing camp that was about 3 hours north of our farm that we would take turns. The girls went for a weekend or maybe 4 days. If we were lucky, it was 4 days. And the guys went first day of fishing, the first day of hunting. They usually went, but we could never go together. It was very rare that the entire family got to go anywhere together because we had a 100-acre operation with, 50 head of cattle, and it just didn't work.
Well, have to take care of them,
Absolutely.
And if you have
somebody has to be here.
If you have milking cows or something like that, it's even more intense.
It absolutely is.
Hey, it's not, and there's, like I said, there's no vacation. They don't go on strike.
And a lot of the things that I'm learning now, like the earthing and the grounding and different healing capacities. I mean, when I'm doing Reiki and I want to go ground somebody after their session, I take them outside. I take them outside and I ground them. There's all these big trees and there's acres and acres and acres of fields that they can go in. And it's just a really relaxing, very spiritual, it's very retreat-like, and it's really awesome. So when somebody gets to see me in my home office, they're really excited. They're like, oh, I get to come to the farm.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, I think that there's something really valid about that. And, you ground in the ground.
Right, absolutely. And we can pull energy from the earth. And a lot of times, I grew up thinking God was Gandalf, Lord of the Rings, long white beard, big long white robe. And now I'm realizing my parents are deceased, and I still have parents. I have a father God and a mother earth, and I just got to tap into that energy and connect to it. And it's very comforting, it's very healing, and it's very beneficial. And there's a lot of times that I introduce people to that concept, and it's foreign to them, and it's really helped me, and I want to give that healing and that opportunity to other people.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that's why some of these outward bound kind of programs for the troubled adolescents have been so effective.
Absolutely.
Because they put them back into nature, and they see how, the world really works.
Mm-hmm. And there is a cycle, just like you said. There's a cycle, and you have to respect it.
Right. Well, the cycle stays the same.
Exactly.
I always crack up when people say we're going to destroy the planet. I just laugh. I go, oh, we're not destroying the planet at all. We're destroying ourselves. The planet will compensate. It doesn't care.
Absolutely.
It will exist long after we're gone. Well, we're almost running out of time. So I'd like you to go through your websites and, how people can contact Jenny.
Well, I have my main website is www.serenityjenny. That's SRSERENITY, Jenny, JENNY.com. And they can follow me at Serenity 8675309 on Twitter. A little play on numbers and song title there.
Okay.
If you're old enough to catch that one.
Right.
And then you can follow me on Facebook at Serenity Jenny. And I also have the Healing Fields Wellness Center and Spiritual Retreat on Facebook, as well as Free E-Learning Center.
Great. All right. I'm just going to finish off here. I'll be right back with you.
Great.
For those listening, I want to say thanks to our-truth.com for making this broadcast possible. You can also find more information about me and my book series, The Archangel Jeremiel and the War to Conquer Heaven, at www.john-j-higgins.com. And my website for this radio show is www.hangingwithhiggins.com. And with that, I will say good night.